They refused to treat Big Shaq's mother, dismissing her like she didn't matter. Big mistake. When Shaquille O'Neal found out, he didn't just get angry, he got even. But instead of revenge, he did something no one saw coming. He built a clinic that would change lives forever. Now the same system that turned her away is begging for survival. This isn't just a story of injustice, it's a story of power, resilience, and a legacy bigger than basketball. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows over Westgate Private Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical centers in Atlanta. The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the air smelled of antiseptic and wealth. Everything about this place screamed exclusivity, from the silent automatic doors to the receptionists with rehearsed plastic smiles. Lucille O'Neal stepped inside, one hand pressed against her stomach as she winced. The dull ache she had been ignoring for weeks had sharpened overnight, turning into something she could no longer brush off. She had always been tough, always endured pain without complaint, but today was different. She walked slowly to the front desk, adjusting her simple but elegant beige blazer over her shoulders. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, looked up, and for a moment, her polite expression faltered. Lucille saw it. The quick up-and-down glance, the silent judgment. "May I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone neutral but distant. Lucille took a steadying breath. "Yes, I'm here to see a doctor. I haven't been feeling well for a few weeks now, and I think it's time I get checked out." The receptionist's fake smile returned, but there was a stiffness to it. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" "We only take walk-ins for urgent cases," the woman interrupted. "You might want to try a community clinic downtown. They're better equipped for general care." Lucille's lips pressed together. She had been through this before, more times than she could count. Too many places, too many faces assuming she didn't belong. "I'd prefer to be seen here," she said, keeping her voice even. "I have insurance, and I can pay out of pocket if necessary." The receptionist hesitated, then forced another smile. "I'll need to check with the doctor on call." Lucille nodded, stepping aside as the woman turned toward the whispering nurses behind her desk. Lucille settled into a chair in the waiting area, ignoring the occasional glances from other patients. Some were subtle, just a quick flick of the eyes before looking away. Others weren't. A middle-aged man in a navy suit eyed her with thinly veiled curiosity, shifting in his seat as if her presence was an intrusion. A younger woman, clutching a designer purse, leaned toward her husband and whispered something. The husband chuckled. Lucille closed her eyes briefly, battling the familiar sting. She had been here before, not just in hospitals, but in restaurants, boutiques, banks, dealerships. The silent questioning of whether she belonged in a space. The irony was almost laughable. If they knew who she was, who her son was, they would be tripping over themselves to offer her the best care available. But Lucille O'Neal had never been the kind of woman to throw her son's name around. She wanted to be treated with dignity because she was a person, not because of who she was connected to. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Lucille shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The pain had worsened. She considered asking again when a tall, gray-haired man in a white coat approached the front desk. Dr. William Mitchell. Lucille didn't know him, but she recognized the type immediately. Expensive watch, confident stride, the kind of doctor who thrived in places like this, catering to the city's elite. The receptionist gestured toward Lucille, speaking in hushed tones. Dr. Mitchell gave a single glance in her direction, a quick flick of his eyes that lasted less than a second. Then he sighed, shook his head. And just like that, Lucille knew. A minute later, the receptionist returned, her smile even tighter than before. "Dr. Mitchell is very busy today, and unfortunately, he's not taking any additional walk-ins." Lucille frowned. "I've been sitting here for nearly half an hour. There's no one else waiting ahead of me." "I understand," the receptionist said in that same patronizing tone. "But we recommend you visit a clinic that better fits your needs." Lucille exhaled slowly. She knew exactly what that meant. "I don't need a different clinic," she said, voice unwavering. "I need a doctor, I'm experiencing persistent stomach pain. That qualifies as a medical concern, doesn't it? The receptionist shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between maintaining her polished demeanor and getting Lucille to leave. Mrs. O'Neill, Dr. Mitchell said suddenly, stepping forward. His voice was smooth but detached, the way one might speak to an insistent child. Some discomfort is normal at your age, he continued. Have you considered adjusting your diet? Lucille stared at him. Did he just assume this was about food? I'd like an examination, she said. Not nutrition advice. Dr. Mitchell sighed as if she were asking for something unreasonable. Look, I can prescribe something mild for the pain, but I strongly suggest you visit a clinic where they focus on community health care. That's their specialty. Lucille's stomach twisted, and it wasn't just from the pain. She had good insurance. She could afford specialists, private treatment, anything she needed. But none of that mattered to Dr. Mitchell, who had already decided what kind of patient she was. Let me make sure I understand, Lucille said slowly, keeping her voice steady. I'm standing here in pain, with the ability to pay for your services, but you're refusing to examine me? Dr. Mitchell's smile was thin and dismissive. I just think your needs would be better met elsewhere. Lucille held his gaze, waiting, watching. Dr. Mitchell didn't waver, and that's when she knew he never intended to treat her at all. Lucille walked out of the hospital, her chest tight, not just from the pain but from the anger bubbling beneath it. She wasn't surprised, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. The moment Shaq answered, she didn't need to say much. Ma? His voice was warm, relaxed. You good? Lucille hesitated, then exhaled. I need to tell you something. There was a pause on the other end, then a shift in his tone. Tell me everything. That night, Shaq sat at his desk, his fingers drumming against the wood. He had always been a man of calm and control, but tonight, his patience was thin. His mother, his rock, his biggest supporter, had been dismissed like she was nothing. And that wasn't going to slide. Shaq grabbed his phone and dialed a number. Avery, he said when she answered. I need to know everything about a doctor. William Mitchell. Avery Carter, medical student and relentless fighter for justice, knew exactly where this was going. I'm on it, she said. Shaq leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. Westgate Private Hospital had no idea who they had just messed with. And by the time Shaquille O'Neal was done, they were going to wish they had never turned his mother away. Shaquille O'Neal's SUV came to a sharp stop outside Westgate Private Hospital, the tires skidding slightly as he yanked the gear into park. His pulse was steady, but his patience was gone. He threw open the door, stepping out in one fluid motion, his 6'11" frame towering over the sleek black vehicle. Dressed in an all-black fitted suit, he looked less like the basketball legend the world adored, and more like a man on a mission, one that wasn't ending in politeness. The automatic doors slid open, and Shaq strode into the pristine lobby. The moment he entered, the soft hum of murmured conversations cut off abruptly. Patients, nurses, and front desk staff froze in place, heads turning one by one as his presence swallowed the room. The receptionist, the same one who had dismissed his mother just hours earlier, stiffened in her seat. She recognized him immediately, her eyes going wide as if she'd just seen a ghost. Shaq's voice was calm, but cold. Where is Dr. Mitchell? The receptionist swallowed hard, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. Sir, do you have an appointment? Shaq's jaw clenched. The man was asking if he had an appointment, the same man who had refused to treat his mother. I don't need an appointment, Shaq said, his voice dropping a register. I need answers. Before the receptionist could respond, a set of heavy double doors swung open, and Dr. William Mitchell stepped into the lobby. His expression was unreadable, his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. He knew why Shaq was here. He didn't care. Shaq turned toward him, his broad shoulders squared, making the room feel smaller in an instant. Dr. Mitchell sighed dramatically and folded his arms. Mr. O'Neill, I assume this is about your mother? The doctor's tone was bored, as if this entire confrontation was nothing more than an inconvenience. Shaq's nostrils flared slightly, but he kept his voice steady, controlled, dangerous. You assumed she wasn't worth your time, Shaq said, taking a slow step forward. She was in pain, and you... Dr. Mitchell held up a hand. I didn't refuse her treatment. Shaq's eyes darkened. You told her to go somewhere else, he said, his tone clipped. You looked at her and decided she wasn't your kind of patient. Dr. Mitchell let out a small, condescending chuckle. Mr. O'Neill, I make medical recommendations based on what's best for the patient. Your mother would have been better suited at a community clinic that specializes in cases like hers. Shaq's jaw tightened. Cases like hers? Dr. Mitchell shrugged. Lower-income patients, routine care, general practice. Those clinics exist for a reason. The words hit like a slap. A slow, seething rage burned behind Shaq's eyes. But before he could speak, another voice interrupted. Dr. Mitchell, a deep, authoritative voice called out. That's enough. A well-groomed man in his mid-60s, dressed in a tailored gray suit, approached with measured confidence. The gold nameplate pinned to his blazer read, Paul Kensington, Hospital Director. He extended a hand to Shaq, flashing a practiced politician's smile. Mr. O'Neill, he said smoothly. I'd like to personally apologize for any inconvenience your mother experienced. Westgate Hospital values all of our patients. Shaq ignored his hand. Kensington's smile barely wavered. He pulled his hand back, clasping it in front of him instead. Doctor. Mitchell's choice of words was unfortunate, Kensington continued, throwing a sharp look at the doctor. Rest assured we will look into the matter internally. Shaq let out a slow breath through his nose. I don't want an internal review, he said. I want you to tell me, right here, right now, why my mother wasn't treated with respect. Kensington tilted his head slightly, as if considering how to spin the situation. Then, after a pause, he gave a tight-lipped smile. I'm afraid that's a misunderstanding. Mr. O'Neill. Shaq's fingers curled into fists at his sides. They weren't going to admit it. They weren't going to take responsibility. This wasn't just one doctor. It was the entire system. A system built to keep people like his mother at arm's length while catering to the wealthy without hesitation. How many other Lucille O'Neills had walked in here and been ignored? How many had left untreated because of silent, calculated discrimination? And how many had never gotten a second chance? A gentle hand touched Shaq's arm. Lucille stood beside him now, her eyes calm but knowing. Shaquille, she said softly. Shaq turned to her. His mother was the strongest woman he knew, and yet she had been made to feel small in this place. Arguing won't change anything, she said, her voice steady. You want to make a difference? Do something real. Shaq swallowed, his breathing slowing. Lucille's eyes held no anger, no resentment, just quiet wisdom, the kind that had always guided him. She was right. Words wouldn't fix this, but actions could. Shaq took one last look at Kensington and Dr. Mitchell, memorizing their smug, indifferent faces. Then he stepped back. You're right, Ma, he said finally. This isn't worth my time. Dr. Mitchell smirked, thinking he had won. Shaq met his gaze and smiled, a slow, calculated smile that sent a chill down the doctor's spine. Then, without another word, Shaq turned and walked toward the exit, his mother by his side. As they stepped outside, Shaq pulled out his phone. He scrolled to Avery Carter's number and hit call. Shaq? Avery answered after the first ring. What's up? Shaq's grip tightened around the phone. I'm done talking, he said. It's time to do something real. Avery hesitated, then asked, What are you thinking? Shaq's eyes locked onto the Westgate Hospital sign, standing tall and unbothered. I want to know how deep this problem goes, he said. I want numbers, statistics, patient stories. I want to know how many people they've turned away. Avery's voice sharpened. You got it. Shaq exhaled slowly, his anger settling into something more dangerous, determination. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Shaq sat at his desk, his massive hands resting on the smooth mahogany surface, his phone screen glowing in front of him. He had spent his life breaking barriers in basketball, business, and entertainment. But this was different. This was personal. Lucille had raised him to believe in hard work, respect, and fairness, But the reality she had faced at Westgate Private Hospital had nothing to do with any of that. She wasn't turned away because she couldn't pay, wasn't mistreated because she lacked dignity. She was ignored because of who they assumed she was. And Shaq wasn't about to let that slide. He took a deep breath and tapped on his recent calls. Avery Carter, he muttered to himself. He had heard her name before, a young, relentless medical student with a reputation for exposing corruption in healthcare. She was smart, fearless, and most importantly, she knew exactly how the system worked. Shaq hit dial. The phone rang twice before a sharp, confident voice answered. "This is Avery." Shaq leaned forward. "We need to talk." Avery Carter was not easily impressed. She had grown up watching her father, a respected black physician, get passed over for promotions while less experienced white doctors moved ahead. She had seen patients mistreated, ignored, or forced to wait for hours, while others, those with the right look, were ushered into private rooms with first-class care. So when Shaquille O'Neal walked into the cafe to meet her, she wasn't starstruck. She was curious. Shaq sat across from her, his presence commanding but calm. Even in a casual hoodie and jeans, he dominated the space around him. But Avery didn't shrink. She met his gaze head-on. "You're digging into Westgate," she said, getting straight to the point. Shaq nodded. "Yeah." Avery tilted her head. "Why?" Shaq exhaled. "Because they did it to my mom. And if they did it to her, they've done it to others." Avery studied him for a moment, then slid a thick folder across the table. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Proof," Avery said simply. Shaq opened it, his eyes scanning the documents inside. Patient complaints, internal emails, hidden reports. Page after page of undeniable evidence. "Westgate has been getting away with this for years," Avery explained. "Black and Latino patients are 5 times more likely to be dismissed or misdiagnosed. Low-income patients, even the ones with full insurance, are often pushed toward community clinics to keep hospital numbers looking good." Shaq's jaw tightened. Avery leaned in. "And Dr. William Mitchell? He's been at the center of it. Your mom wasn't his first victim." Shaq looked up. "What do you mean?" Avery's expression darkened. "There's something you need to see." Avery pulled out her laptop and clicked on a hidden drive. She turned the screen toward Shaq. "These are recorded patient statements from people who were turned away by Mitchell." Shaq pressed play. The first video loaded. A young black father with tired eyes and a weary voice. "My wife was having complications with her pregnancy. We went to Westgate, but Mitchell barely looked at her. He told us to go to a free clinic. By the time we got there, she had lost too much blood. We lost the baby." Shaq's stomach clenched. The next video, a Latina woman in her 50s. "I had chest pain. Real bad. I told them I had insurance, but Mitchell said it was probably just stress and that I should relax and drink more water. 2 days later, I had a heart attack." Shaq gritted his teeth. The final clip, a teenage girl. "My mom was really sick. She couldn't breathe. They told her it wasn't serious and sent us away. She died at home." Shaq snapped the laptop shut. His hands curled into fists. This wasn't just racism. This was neglect. This was life and death. "They're killing people," he said, his voice dangerously low. Avery nodded. "And no one's holding them accountable." Shaq leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "So, let's change that," he said. That night, Shaq posted a single tweet. "What happens when a system built to heal starts picking who deserves care? Or justice for all? Healthcare corruption." Within minutes, it exploded. News outlets picked up the story. Activists and celebrities started speaking out. Former patients began sharing their stories, and Westgate's reputation started to crack. But then, the retaliation started. 2 days later, Shaq got a call from an unknown number. He answered, expecting a reporter. Instead, a calm but authoritative voice filled the line. "Mr. O'Neal," the man said, "this is Robert Callahan. I'm on the board of directors at Westgate." Shaq leaned back in his chair. "That's supposed to mean something to me?" Callahan chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You've made a lot of noise in the last 48 hours. Shaq said nothing.